2,000 years ago, humanity was young among the stars. They had only just learned to travel between worlds. Their ships were slow and small, and their colonies were few. But they were happy. They had found life in the galaxy, hundreds of alien species, old civilizations that had ruled the stars for millions of years. And when the Galactic Council invited humanity to join them, every person on Earth celebrated. They believed they had found a family among the stars. The council was made of 12 elder species. They controlled trade, law, and military power across most of the known galaxy. Their leader was called the High Arbiter, and at that time, the position belonged to a creature named Votan's predecessor, a cold and ancient being who saw humans the way a farmer sees insects. Useful, perhaps, but never equal. For the first 50 years, things seemed fine. Humans sent their scientists to learn. They sent their children on cultural exchange programs to alien worlds, believing it was an honor. Thousands of human families signed up. They dressed their sons and daughters in their best clothes, packed their bags with toys and books, and kissed them goodbye at the doors of alien transport ships. They believed their children would come home in a year, full of stories and wonder. The children never came home. It started with silence. The families stopped receiving messages. The council said there were communication delays. Then they said the programs had been extended. Then they stopped answering at all. When human leaders demanded answers, the council invited them to a closed session. And there, behind sealed doors, they told humanity the truth. The children had been taken under a secret resolution called the Harvest Accord. 100,000 human children, taken from schools, from exchange ships, from colony nurseries. The council had studied human biology and found something remarkable. Human DNA was the most adaptive genetic material in the galaxy. It could bond with almost any alien gene structure. It could resist radiation, disease, and mutation better than any species the council had ever found. And so the council had decided, in a quiet vote that no human ever saw, that human children would be used as raw material for genetic weapons research. The human leaders sat in silence as the council explained this. They were told it was for the greater good of the galaxy. They were told that humans should feel honored that their species could contribute something so valuable. They were told that resistance was pointless because the council controlled 10,000 warships and humanity controlled fewer than 200. When the human ambassador, a woman named Nari's mother, stood up and demanded the return of every child, the council laughed. Enough to fill that chamber with a sound that humanity would never forget. The council congratulated itself on handling the situation cleanly. But on Earth, in the dark, something was happening that the council never expected. A young girl named Nari was 7 years old when the ships came to her colony school. She remembered everything. She remembered the alien soldiers walking through the hallways, their long arms pulling children from under desks. She remembered her best friend, a boy named Genu, screaming as he was dragged away. She remembered the sound the transport doors made when they closed, a heavy final sound, like the lid of a coffin. Nari was not taken. She was sick that day and had been kept in the medical room behind a locked door that the alien soldiers did not bother to open. She survived by accident, and she carried that accident like a wound for the rest of her very long life. When Nari was 30, she made her first recording. She sat in a small room, looked into a camera, and told her story. Every sound, every face. She called it the first cry. That recording was copied and spread to every human settlement. It was played in schools, in homes, in shelters. Every human alive heard it. Every human born after heard it. It became the most important recording in human history. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was true. A small girl telling the world what had been done to children who trusted the stars. After the defeat, humanity's leaders gathered in secret. They argued for weeks. Some wanted to fight again immediately. Some wanted to surrender fully and beg for mercy. But a third group, quiet and patient, proposed something else entirely. They said humanity should disappear. Not die, not surrender, disappear. They dismantled their own communication beacons. They shut down every signal, every broadcast, every light that could be seen from space. They abandoned their visible colonies and moved underground, into asteroid fields, into rogue planets drifting between stars, into the dark, empty spaces where no one ever looked. They took everything with them, their tools, their knowledge, their anger. Within 300 years, the galaxy believed humans were extinct, killed by despair, the council assumed, collapsed under the weight of their own grief. Good riddance, some said. They were never meant for the stars. But in the dark, humanity was building. Every generation passed the story down. Every child learned the names. Every family carried the memory of someone who was taken. And across 2,000 years, in silence and shadow, they built themselves into something the galaxy had never seen before. Something patient, something furious, something that would not stop until every name was answered for. 2,000 years after the children were stolen, Admiral Dohan stood on the bridge of the warship Unforgiven. He was a tall man with a still face and eyes that carried a sadness older than his own lifetime. On his wrist, he wore a small bracelet made of white string. His sister had made it for him when she was 5. She was taken 3 days later. He looked at the holographic map in front of him. The entire galaxy spread out in light. Every council homeworld was marked in red. He had waited his whole life for this moment. His parents had waited. Their parents had waited. 100 generations of humans had lived and died in the dark, all waiting for this. Dohan touched the bracelet on his wrist. He closed his eyes for 1 second. Then he opened them and spoke 2 words to the fleet. 2,000 years, begin. And across the darkness of hidden space, 10,000 engines roared to life. The galaxy believed humanity was dead. For 2,000 years, no human signal had been detected. No human ship had been seen. No human voice had been heard on any frequency in any corner of known space. The Galactic Council held a celebration every century to mark what they called the Era of Stability. And in every speech, in every toast, they praised the wisdom of containing the human problem before it grew. High Arbiter Votan, the current leader of the Council, had never seen a human in his life. To him, they were ancient history, a mistake that had been corrected long ago. He was wrong. He was terribly, completely wrong. In the spaces between stars, where light did not reach and scanners did not look, humanity had built an empire of shadow. Not an empire of land or planets, but an empire of purpose. Every station, every ship, every forge world hidden in the dark existed for one single reason. And every human born in those 2,000 years knew that reason before they could walk. Dr. Hana was the architect of it all. She was a scientist, small and quiet, with thin hands and sharp eyes that missed nothing. She had lived far longer than any natural human lifespan. Every few decades, she entered cryogenic sleep, and every few decades, she woke to check on the progress of what she had named Project Long Memory. The name was simple. Its meaning was not. Project Long Memory was humanity's promise to itself that it would never forget, never soften, and never stop building until the debt was paid. Under Hana's guidance, human science had leaped forward in ways the galaxy could not imagine. While the council species grew comfortable and lazy, protected by their old technologies and old treaties, humans worked with the desperate focus of a species that had nothing left to lose and everything to build. They created fold space drives, engines that could tear a hole in space itself and move a ship across the galaxy in minutes. The Council's fastest ships took weeks to cross the same distance. They built ghost armor, suits for soldiers that bent light and sound and heat around the body, making the wearer invisible to every known sensor in the galaxy. They designed sunbreaker cannons, weapons so powerful they could reach into the core of a star and collapse it. A single shot could kill a solar system. And they built these weapons not because they wanted to destroy stars, but because they wanted the Council to know that they could. But the most important creation was the Cradle Network. It was a system of 100,000 artificial minds, each one named after a stolen child. Each AI carried the full record of that child's life, their name, their face, their family, the date they were taken. The Cradle Network was designed to coordinate the entire war effort, but it was more than a military tool. It was a memorial that thought. It was a graveyard that planned battles. Every tactical decision the fleet would make in the coming war would be processed through minds that carried the names of the children the Council had stolen. Hana had spent centuries building it. When she activated the final AI, she sat alone in her laboratory and cried. Not from sadness, from the weight of knowing it was almost time. On the hidden world of Geomun, deep inside a rogue planet that drifted in empty space, the war academies trained every generation. Sergeant Hyuk was a product of those academies. He was a big man with rough hands and a calm voice that could carry across a battlefield without shouting. He had trained since the age of 6. Every child on Geomun did. The mornings began with combat drills, hand-to-hand fighting, weapons training, tactical simulations that ran for days without rest. But the evenings were different. In the evenings, the teachers told stories, not fairy tales, not adventures. They told the stories of the stolen children. Each night, a different name, a different face projected on the wall, a different life that had been cut short. When Hyuk graduated from the academy at 18, he stood in a line with 500 other soldiers. One by one, a name was read aloud, the name of a stolen child. Each soldier stepped forward, received the name, and carried it from that day onward. Hyuk received the name Somin, a girl, 7 years old when she was taken. Her mother had kept every picture she ever made, until the day her mother died in the underground, still waiting. Hyuk carried Somin's name on a small metal tag around his neck. He never took it off. He never would. Captain Yuna had not seen sunlight in 11 years. She lived aboard the Black Cradle, a stealth warship so advanced that it could drift through the middle of a Council fleet without being detected. For over a decade, Yuna and her crew had moved through Council space like ghosts, mapping every fleet position, every defense grid, every supply line, every weakness. Yuna was not a large woman. She was lean and sharp, with short hair and eyes that moved constantly, always watching, always calculating. She spoke little and smiled less. Her crew feared her slightly and trusted her completely. She had never lost a crew member on a mission. She did not intend to start. When she returned to hidden human space with her final intelligence package, she presented it to Admiral Dohun in a room with no windows. The data was perfect. Complete fleet positions, defense schedules, communication codes, political divisions within the Council. Every secret the galaxy thought was safe, Yuna had stolen. Dohun studied the data for 3 hours without speaking. Then he looked at Yuna and said, "They have no idea we exist." Yuna shook her head. None. There was one more secret. Ambassador Kelsey of the Miran species had been feeding information to humanity for centuries. The Miran were a gentle, quiet species who had voted against the Harvest Accord 2,000 years ago and been overruled. They never forgot their shame. Kelsey was the latest in a long line of Miran who had left data packages in abandoned systems for human scouts to find. Star maps, Council meeting records, research files. Kelsey knew that when the war began, the Miran would need to be far from the fighting. She had already begun quietly moving her people away from Council core worlds. She told no one why. Meanwhile, in the Grand Chamber of the Galactic Council, Votan was giving a speech. He spoke of peace. He spoke of prosperity. He spoke of the wisdom of the elder species who had guided the galaxy for so long. The council members applauded. They ate fine food and drank rare wines and laughed at old jokes about the primitive species that had once thought they could sit among the stars. Only one person in the chamber was not laughing. Legate Prune, Votan's military advisor, sat in his chair with his hands folded and his face still. Prune had spent years studying old records. He had found things that troubled him: strange gaps in deep space sensor data, anomalous energy readings in regions where nothing should exist, faint signals that appeared and vanished too quickly to trace. He had brought his concerns to Votan 3 times. 3 times he had been told he was imagining things. Prune was not imagining things. He knew it in his bones. Something was out there in the dark. Something that had been out there for a very long time. Back in human space, Dr. Hana stood before a console that stretched the length of an entire room. Behind her, Admiral Dohun, Captain Yuna, General Taemin, and Sergeant Hyuk watched in silence. Every screen in hidden human space was tuned to this moment. Hana placed her hand on the activation panel. The cradle network hummed. 100,000 minds stirred. 100,000 names flickered across screens on every ship, every station, every world humanity had hidden in the dark. The lights across all of human space changed from amber to red. Hana closed her eyes and whispered, "Children, it is time to bring you home." And in the silence of the void, a species that the galaxy had forgotten began to move. The first thing the galaxy lost was its voice. At exactly the same moment across 40 star systems, every communication relay belonging to the Galactic Council went dark. There was no warning, no signal, no error message. One moment, 1,000 worlds were connected in a web of light and data. The next moment, silence. Total, absolute silence. On the Council's military hub world, commanders stared at their screens and saw nothing. Calls went unanswered. Emergency channels returned static. Ships in orbit tried to contact ground stations and heard only the cold hiss of empty frequencies. In 6 minutes, the greatest communication network in galactic history was dead. No one knew what had happened. Some thought it was a technical failure. Some thought it was a solar storm. The truth was simpler and far more terrifying. Humanity had spent decades planting microscopic devices on every relay node in Council space. Tiny machines, no larger than a grain of dust, invisible to every scanner. At the signal from the cradle network, they all activated at once and burned out every relay from the inside. And then the ships came. They appeared from nowhere, not from hyperspace lanes or jump gates or any method of travel the galaxy recognized. They tore through the fabric of space itself, fold space ruptures that opened and closed in the blink of an eye. Thousands of warships, black and angular, with no lights and no markings. They looked like pieces of the void itself had broken free and taken shape. Captain Yuna was the first to engage. Her black cradle dropped out of stealth directly above the Council's largest orbital defense station. Before the station's crew could even understand what they were looking at, Yuna's weapons had already fired. The station broke apart in a bloom of white light. She was already moving to the next target. Across 40 systems, the story was the same. Human fleets appeared without warning, struck military targets with terrifying precision, and moved on before the Council could organize a response. There were no mistakes, no wasted shots. Every target had been mapped by Yuna's scouts years in advance. Every attack was coordinated by the Cradle Network, 100,000 AI minds working together with a speed and accuracy that no organic command structure could match. Admiral Dohun watched the battle unfold from the Bridge of the Unforgiven. His officers reported strike after strike, system after system, falling into human control. Dohun said nothing. His face showed nothing. He simply watched the red markers on his map turn, one by one, to blue. He had imagined this moment every day of his life. Now that it was here, he felt not joy, but a deep, heavy sadness. This should never have been necessary. None of this should ever have happened. But it had happened. And so, this was happening. On the ground, General Taemin led the first planetary assault. Taemin was a mountain of a man, scarred across his face and arms from decades of training exercises that used live weapons, because he believed soldiers should know what pain felt like before they were asked to cause it. He dropped from orbit, with 10,000 soldiers in ghost armor, invisible to every sensor the enemy possessed. The Council's military hub world was heavily defended. Thousands of alien troops manned fortified positions. Heavy weapons covered every approach. Shield generators protected every critical building. The defenders were confident. Their positions had been designed to hold against any known assault force for months. Taemin's forces moved through them like wind through grass. The alien soldiers could not see the humans. They could not hear them. They could not detect them on any instrument. They only knew the humans were there when their shield generators exploded, when their communication towers collapsed, when their weapon systems went offline one by one. Taemin did not fight for territory. He fought for infrastructure, power grids, command centers, weapons factories. He destroyed the enemy's ability to fight without ever engaging their soldiers directly. The hub world fell in 9 hours. The Council had expected it to hold for a year. Sergeant Hyuk was on the ground in one of the captured cities. His squad moved through streets filled with fleeing alien civilians. The aliens ran in terror from an enemy they could not see, screaming in languages Hyuk did not understand, but whose meaning was clear enough. They were afraid. They were confused. They did not know why this was happening. Hyuk's orders were absolute and came directly from Admiral Dohun. No civilian casualties. Humanity's war was with the Council's military and political leaders, not with ordinary people who had never voted for the Harvest Accord and probably did not even know it existed. Any soldier who harmed a civilian would face the harshest punishment human law allowed. As Hyuk's squad moved through a collapsed building, a small alien child stumbled out of the rubble. The child was crying, covered in dust, alone. Hyuk soldiers stopped. For a moment, no one moved. Then Hyuk deactivated his ghost armor, becoming visible. The child stared up at him with wide, wet eyes. Hyuk knelt down, picked the child up carefully, and carried it to a safety zone that his squad had established 2 blocks away. He set the child down gently and made sure a medical team was coming. One of his soldiers asked him why he had broken cover for an alien child. Hyuk touched the metal tag around his neck, the one that carried Samin's name, and said, "We are not them. We will never be them." While the ground war raged, Captain Yuna was executing the mission she had planned for years. The Black Cradle slipped through the heaviest defenses in Council space and reached the genetic archives, a massive underground facility on a frozen moon where the Council had conducted its experiments on human children for centuries. Yuna led the strike team personally. They cut through the facility's doors and moved inside. What they found broke something in every person who saw it. Thousands of cloning tanks lined the walls, most of them dark and empty now, but the stains inside them told their own story. Laboratories filled with surgical tools designed for small bodies. Data cores containing millions of files, each one documenting experiments performed on children who had names and faces and families who had loved them. Yuna stood in the center of that terrible place and felt her hands shake. She was not a woman who showed emotion easily. She had trained herself to be cold, to be precise, to be a weapon. But in that room, surrounded by the evidence of what had been done to her species' children, she felt something crack inside her chest. She ordered her team to secure every file, every record, every piece of evidence. Then she transmitted it all to the fleet. When the data reached the other ships, there was silence on every bridge. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives for this war, who had hardened themselves against fear and pain, stood at their stations and wept. The anger that followed was not hot. It was cold. It was the kind of anger that does not shout. It settles into the bones and stays there forever. High Arbiter Votan received the first fragmented reports in his private chamber. Attacks across 40 systems. Communications destroyed. His military hub world fallen. He could not process it. He screamed at his advisors for answers. Who is doing this? What species dares to attack the council? Legate Prune stepped forward. His face was gray. His voice was steady, but his hands trembled slightly at his sides. It is the humans, Arbiter. The chamber went silent. Votan stared at Prune as if the legate had spoken in a dead language. That is impossible, Votan said. They are extinct. They have been extinct for 2,000 years. Prune shook his head slowly. They were never extinct. They were waiting. Before Votan could respond, the sky outside the chamber window lit up. In a distant but visible star system, a star that had burned for billions of years suddenly flickered, collapsed, and died. The Sunbreaker cannon had fired. An uninhabited system, chosen carefully. No lives lost, but the message was clear to every species that saw it. Humanity could kill stars, and they were choosing, for now, not to. Then every screen in Council space activated. Every channel, every frequency, every display on every world. A human face appeared. Admiral Dohan, calm, still, his eyes carrying the weight of 2,000 years. He spoke, and his voice reached every corner of the galaxy. This is Admiral Dohan of the United Human Fleet. 2,000 years ago, you stole our children. You thought we would break. You thought we would forget. You were wrong about both. Return what you took. Every record, every remain, every name, or we will come for everything you are. The transmission ended. The galaxy sat in stunned, horrified silence. And somewhere in the dark, 10,000 human warships turned toward the Council's heart. The Galactic Council was crumbling. Not from the outside, where human warships burned through defense lines like fire through dry paper, but from the inside, where the truth was doing more damage than any weapon ever could. Captain Yuna's transmission of the genetic archives data had reached every corner of the galaxy. Every species, every world, every government now had access to the full records of what the Council had done to 100,000 human children. The files were detailed. The Council scientists had been thorough in their documentation. Every experiment was logged. Every procedure was recorded. Every child was listed by a number, not a name, because names would have made them people, and the scientists had not wanted to think of them as people. The galaxy reacted with horror. On dozens of worlds, ordinary citizens watched the data broadcasts and could not believe what they were seeing. The Council had told them the humans were contained for the good of all species. They had never mentioned children. They had never mentioned experiments. They had never mentioned the Harvest Accord. Within days of the broadcast, 5 Council member species withdrew. They sent formal declarations to both the Council and the human fleet, stating that they had not known the truth, that they condemned the Harvest Accord, and that they would not fight to defend the leaders who had signed it. 3 more species declared neutrality and opened their borders to human ships, asking only that their civilian worlds be left unharmed. Admiral Dohan accepted every declaration. He had no interest in punishing the innocent. His war had always been aimed at the head of the beast, not its body. But Votan refused to surrender. The High Arbiter stood in the council chamber, surrounded by the few loyalist species who remained, and raged against what he called an unprovoked attack by a primitive species. He demanded total military mobilization. He ordered every remaining fleet to converge on the Iron Corridor, a heavily fortified region of space that served as the only direct route to the Council's capital system. The corridor was filled with weapons platforms, minefields, and battle stations. It had been built over thousands of years to stop any invading force. Votan believed it would hold long enough for him to organize a counterattack. Legate Prune knew better. He had studied the battle data from the fallen systems. He had seen how fast the human ships moved, how their weapons cut through council shields like they were made of air, how their soldiers appeared and disappeared like ghosts. He knew the Iron Corridor would not hold. He knew the war was already lost. And he knew that staying loyal to Votan meant dying for a cause that did not deserve loyalty. Prune contacted Admiral Dohun through a secret channel. It was a risk. If Votan discovered the communication, Prune would be executed for treason. But Prune had made his decision. He offered Dohun full intelligence on the Iron Corridor's defenses, its weapon placements, its shield rotation schedules, and the locations of the Council's last resort weapons. In exchange, he asked only one thing: that Dohun spare his species from destruction. Dohun looked at Prune's image on the screen for a long time. Then he said, "Your people will live, but your council will not." Prune closed his eyes, nodded, and transmitted the data. The Battle of the Iron Corridor began 3 days later. General Taemin led the assault. The corridor stretched across an entire star system, filled with thousands of weapons platforms, and defended by the Council's largest remaining fleet, over 6,000 warships from 7 different species, all crammed into a space designed to be a killing ground for any attacker. Taemin did not care. He had trained for exactly this kind of fight. His strategy was simple and brutal. First, the Cradle Network identified every shield generator in the corridor. Then, surgical strike teams and stealth ships destroyed them simultaneously. Without shields, the weapons platforms were exposed. The human fleet moved in. The battle lasted 3 days. It was the largest military engagement the galaxy had ever seen. Thousands of ships on both sides filled the void with weapons fire so dense that the corridor glowed like a ribbon of white light, visible from neighboring systems. Taemin lost ships. Every loss hurt, because every human life was precious to a species that had spent 2,000 years in hiding, counting every birth as a victory against extinction. But the Council forces lost more. They lost far more. Their ships were slower, their weapons were weaker, their tactics were outdated by centuries, and their soldiers, brave as many of them were fighting for leaders they no longer believed in, defending a cause that the galaxy now knew was built on the bones of stolen children. On the second day, 2 more species withdrew their fleets from the battle and surrendered directly to Taemin. On the third day, the corridor's last defense station was destroyed. The path to the Council's capital was open. While the fleet advanced, Elder Nari made her final broadcast. She was ancient now, kept alive far beyond any natural limit by technology that Dr. Hana had built specifically for her. Her body was frail, her voice was thin, but her mind was clear, and her words carried a weight that no weapon could match. She sat in a simple chair, in a simple room, and spoke to the galaxy. She told her story again. The same story she had told in her first recording, 2,000 years ago. The colony school, the alien soldiers, her friend Jinnu being dragged away screaming, the sound of the transport doors closing. She told it slowly, with pauses where her voice broke, and she did not apologize for the pauses. Then she said something new. She said she had lived long enough. She said she had carried the memory for 2,000 years, waiting for the day when someone would answer for what was done. She said she was tired, and she said that she would rest soon, but not yet. Not until the last name was accounted for. Not until every child came home. Alien species across the galaxy listened to her broadcast. Many had never heard a human voice before. Many had been taught that humans were primitive, violent, dangerous. But the voice they heard was not violent. It was the voice of an old woman who had been a frightened child, who had survived something terrible, and who had refused to let the universe forget. Her broadcast became known as the Last Cry, the final echo of the testimony that had started everything. Deep in the captured Council archives, Yuna's intelligence teams were still working. With Prune's data and the files from the genetic archives, they had pieced together the complete history of what had been done to the stolen children. The records were worse than anyone had imagined. Some children had been experimented on for years before they died. Some had been kept in stasis tanks as living samples, frozen and thawed and frozen again across centuries. Some had been used to create hybrid genetic lines that were tested and discarded when they did not produce the desired results. The youngest child in the records was 3 years old. The oldest was 14. None of them had survived. When this information reached the fleet, something changed. The soldiers had always been angry. They had been raised on that anger. But this was different. This was a cold, final understanding that the Council had not simply taken their children. They had used them, broken them, and thrown them away like laboratory waste. And they had documented every moment of it with the calm efficiency of beings who did not consider their subjects to be alive in any way that mattered. Sergeant Hyuk's squad captured a Council bioweapons facility on a small moon near the capital system. Inside, they found surviving scientists, alien researchers who had spent their careers working on projects derived from the original experiments on human children. Hyuk's soldiers surrounded them. The hatred in the room was thick enough to touch. One of Hyuk's soldiers raised his weapon. Hyuk put his hand on the barrel and pushed it down. "No," he said. His voice was quiet, but every person in the room heard it. "If we execute them in a hallway, we get revenge. If we try them in front of the galaxy, we get justice. Our children deserve justice." The scientists were taken prisoner. They would face trial. The United Human Fleet arrived at the Council's capital system on a day that would be remembered for as long as the galaxy existed. 10,000 warships formed a sphere around the system. Every escape route was sealed. Every defense satellite was jammed or destroyed. The capital world looked up at a sky filled with black ships, so many that they blocked out the stars, and knew that the silence that had lasted 2,000 years was over. In the council chamber, alarms screamed. The building shook as orbital strikes hit military targets across the planet. Votan stood at the center of the room, surrounded by shattered screens and flickering lights, and watched as a communication screen activated on its own. Admiral Dohan's face appeared. Calm, still, unmoved. "You have 12 hours, Dohan said. Surrender every record of every child you took, every name, every experiment, every grave. If even one name is missing, there will be no council left to remember why." The screen went dark. Votan stood alone in the broken chamber, and for the first time in his long life, he understood what it meant to be afraid. The 12 hours passed in silence. No fleet moved. No weapon fired. The 10,000 human warships hung in the dark around the Council's capital system like a closed fist waiting to fall, and the galaxy held its breath. Inside the Council chamber, Votan sat on his chair for the first time without pride. His advisors were gone. His allies had fled or surrendered. His fleets were dust. The building around him was scarred and shaking from the orbital strikes that had destroyed every military installation on the planet. And yet, not a single civilian structure had been touched. The precision of it frightened him more than the destruction. These humans could have burned his world to ash. They had chosen not to. That choice was not mercy, it was control. And control was far more terrifying than rage. With 2 hours remaining, Votan gave the order. The complete archives of the Harvest Accord were transmitted to the human fleet. Every name, every experiment log, every medical record, every transfer order, every death certificate marked with a number instead of a name. 2,000 years of horror, compressed into data and sent across the void to the species it had been inflicted upon. Across human space, the archives arrived. On ships and stations and hidden worlds, families who had carried a stolen child's name for generations opened the files and learned at last what had happened. Some found death records, some found experiment logs that described procedures no living thing should ever endure. Some found nothing at all, just a number and the word disposed, and had to accept that they would never know more than that. The grief that moved through humanity that day was not loud. It was the quiet kind, the kind that sits in a room like heavy air and makes it hard to breathe. Admiral Dohun reviewed the archives personally. He read every file. It took him 4 days. He did not sleep. When he finished, he closed the files and sat in his chair for a long time, with his eyes closed and his hand around the white string bracelet on his wrist. His sister's file was in there. He had found it. He now knew what had been done to her, and how it had ended. He would carry that knowledge for the rest of his life, and he would never speak of it to anyone. When the archives were confirmed complete, Dohun ordered the fleet to stand down from combat positions. The war was over. Humanity had not come to conquer. They had come to collect a debt. The debt was paid. Dohun landed on the Council's capital world with a full honor guard. 200 human soldiers in dress uniforms, their ghost armor deactivated, walking in perfect formation through the streets of the alien capital. Alien civilians watched from windows and doorways. What they saw were quiet, disciplined men and women with sad eyes, marching in silence. Dohun entered the council chamber. It was the same room where the Harvest Accord had been signed 2,000 years ago. The same walls, the same podium, the same seats where alien leaders had laughed at a human mother who begged for her children back. Dohun walked to the central podium. He did not speak. He reached into his coat and pulled out a small, worn object, a stuffed animal, a little dog made of brown fabric, faded and soft from centuries of careful preservation. It had belonged to his sister. She had been holding it when the soldiers came to her school. She had dropped it in the hallway. A teacher had found it and kept it. Somehow, across 2,000 years, it had survived. He placed it on the podium, in the exact center, where treaties were signed and laws were declared. Then he stepped back, looked at Votan, and said nothing. The silence in that chamber was the loudest sound the galaxy had ever heard. Humanity did not destroy the Council. They did something worse. They dismantled it. A new body was created, the Galactic Tribunal, with representatives from every species. Its first and most important task was the trial of those responsible for the Harvest Accord. The trials were public, broadcast on every frequency to every world. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Scientists testified, records were displayed. The full scope of what had been done was laid bare for the entire galaxy to see. Votan was convicted of crimes against sentience. He was not executed. Humanity did not believe in giving their enemies the escape of death. He was sentenced to live the rest of his natural life in a small room, with the complete archives of the Harvest Accord playing on a screen he could not turn off. He would spend his remaining years watching what he had allowed to happen. He would die knowing that the galaxy knew too. The surviving scientists and officials who had carried out the experiments were tried and convicted. Justice was served not with anger, but with process, with evidence, with law. The galaxy watched, and what shocked them most was not humanity's military power, it was their restraint. A species that could kill stars had chosen to build courtrooms instead. On a planet chosen for its beauty, a world of green valleys and still water, and skies that turned gold at sunset, humanity built the Garden of 100,000 Names. It was a memorial unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. A wall of white stone stretched for kilometers across a valley floor. On it, carved in letters that would never fade, was every name. 100,000 names. 100,000 children. Beside each name was a small light that burned continuously, powered by a source that would last longer than the stars themselves. Elder Nari came to the garden on the day it opened. She was carried in a chair because her legs could no longer hold her. She was older than anyone should ever be, held together by technology and by a will that had refused to let her die before this day. They set her down at the beginning of the wall. She reached out with a thin, trembling hand and touched the first name. Then she asked to walk. They helped her stand. And slowly, with one hand on the wall and two people holding her steady, she walked the entire length. It took her all day. She touched every name she could reach. She whispered to some of them. She cried at others. When she reached the end of the wall, where the last name was carved, she looked up at the sky, and the golden light of the sunset caught her face, and for one moment she looked like the child she had been, standing in a school hallway, watching her world come apart. She sat down on the grass beside the wall. She closed her eyes, and there, surrounded by 100,000 names and 100,000 lights, Elder Nari finally allowed herself to rest. She died that evening, quietly, peacefully, the last witness, her purpose complete. Sergeant Hyuk came to the garden the next day with his squad. Each soldier carried the name of a child they had been assigned at graduation. One by one, they found their child's name on the wall. They stood before it. Some saluted, some prayed. Some simply placed a hand on the stone and stood in silence. Hyuk found Samin's name. It was carved in clean, clear letters, and the light beside it burned steady and warm. He took the metal tag from around his neck, the one he had carried through every battle, every mission, every sleepless night in the dark of space. He pressed his forehead against the cool stone and whispered, "I carried your name. I hope I carried it well." He stayed there for a long time. Captain Yuna was given a new command, not a warship this time, an exploration vessel. For the first time in 2,000 years, human ships would fly with their lights on and their transponders active. No more hiding, no more darkness, no more silence. Yuna stood on the bridge of her new ship and looked out at the open stars. She felt something she had never felt before, something her parents and grandparents and every generation before them had never felt. She felt peace. Not the peace of forgetting, the peace of knowing that the work was done, the debt was paid, and the future was finally open. Humanity did not seek to rule the galaxy. They had no interest in empire. Instead, they helped build a new galactic accord, one based on transparency, accountability, and a single absolute law that every species signed and every species understood. No species would ever harm the children of another. Not for science, not for war, not for any reason that any mind could ever invent. The punishment for breaking this law was simple. Humanity would come, and by now, the entire galaxy understood what that meant. Admiral Dohun retired to a quiet world on the edge of human space, a small house on a green hill, overlooking a valley where the wind moved through tall grass, and the sky was wide and empty. He kept only two things on display in his home: his admiral's insignia placed on a shelf, and his sister's stuffed dog set carefully on the table beside his chair. He sat there in the evenings and watched the stars come out. For the first time in his life, They did not look like a map of targets. They did not look like a battlefield. They looked like what they had always been. Lights in the dark, beautiful and far away, and full of possibility. The galaxy had made a mistake 2,000 years ago. They had looked at a small, young, hopeful species and seen weakness. They had taken their children and expected them to break. They did not understand what humans were. Humans were not the species that forgot. Humans were not the species that forgave without justice. Humans were the species that would wait in absolute darkness for 2,000 years, build themselves into something the universe had never seen, cross the entire galaxy with fire and fury, and still at the end of it all, carry a child's stuffed toy gently in their hands. That was why the galaxy feared them. That was why the galaxy needed them. And that was why, in the end, every child came home.